Hi, this is Mary Fran Korb, and I'm here with Frances DeMartino. And she has a story that it is worth listening to. And she was born with her mother being mentally ill, and it's a fascinating story. So, welcome, Frances. So glad that you're
Hi,
here.
I'm
And
glad to be here too.
so, tell our listeners, what was it about your childhood that that is so different than others?
Well, my mother was 16 years old and beautiful.
Mhm.
My father was 26 years old, had his own business, a small deli on Columbus Avenue in Manhattan. My mother's mother was an infamous alcoholic who lived alone with her daughter, and she had one project to get her daughter married. My
Mhm.
father was absolutely taken with my beautiful Irish rose of a mother,
Mhm.
and off to City Hall they went. She signed the papers. My father married her. My maternal grandmother fell off the face of the earth, never to be seen again.
Mhm.
My mother wanted to have children right away at age 16. They were married in January of 61. I was born in December of 61. She wanted two children. She had my brother 19 months later. Betwixt and between, she had postpartum depression, and the doctors decided that once the new baby came, she couldn't have us both. My father had to remove us from the home. So he took us to his mother's house. The story was, I just need a couple of weeks to get things straight, and then I'll be on my way. I lived in with my grandmother, my father, my bachelor uncle, and my little brother Joey until I was 20 and moved out. And my brother lived in my grandmother's home until his death at age 26. So the couple of weeks was just a couple of weeks was you never said a couple of weeks in my grandmother's presence, that she just you didn't put couple and weeks in the same sentence. You just didn't do it. My father was a workaholic, and now that I'm older and remember the signs and have read the articles and watched the programs and scanned the internet, I know that he probably had OCD because of the way he dressed, the same outfit every day, everything precisely hung up, walking a certain way, doing everything a certain way, counting with his fingers. He was always tapping his fingers on the counter in a certain way. And he suffered from depression. The depression I didn't know about until much later because my brother died at age 26 and my father died within a year and a half after. That more or less finished him off. But so what happened? So my mother lived in a separate apartment from us, and my grandmother truly hated her to the point where she would make us, as I remember being 3 years old, and my grandmother making us look for our mother out the window and then spitting on her and teaching us to spit on her. And I didn't like it, but my brother loved it. But then again, he was like a year and a half. So you tell a little kid to do anything. But what he happened to him, and I know it affected him all his life and led to his premature death, was constantly hearing about how his mother abandoned him. What a martyr our grandmother was for taking us in. It worked the opposite with me. And this she never forgave me for. I always felt sorry for my mother because somehow at even a very young age, I knew that something was wrong with her. And I couldn't be mad and
Mhm.
I couldn't be scared of her because if she were in the room, I would go sit next to her. I guess it's like how an abused animal will still protect the owner.
Yeah.
And she did abuse me, but she didn't have a chance to abuse my brother because my grandmother would never leave her alone with him.
And she left left you along with him, with your mother. But what I see here is that your father was mentally ill as well as your mother, and possibly your grandmother, given how cruel she was to your birth mother. Oh my goodness. Um, what would you say is the hardest thing about your childhood?
Um, well, from what I was led to believe, I never really had much of a childhood
Mm,
because I don't blame my grandmother now that I'm older. I'm 62 now. My grandmother was in her 50s when she got us. The relatives told her she was crazy to do it. She had severe arthritis. She was not exactly a person who went out much. And she also had a plan to take my bachelor uncle back to Italy, which she
mm,
was widowed in 1961. My grandfather died a month after my father married. So
oh,
her plan was to go back and see her relatives in Italy. She had come in 1930 and she never saw any of her brothers and sisters again. She never saw her mother and father again because she never got back to Italy. When my grandfather died in 61, she had been 30 plus years away from home. And her dream was to go back to Italy for a very long visit, get my uncle married because she had an arranged marriage. And you would have think that that would have stopped her from wanting to do that.
mm,
But no, she wanted to get him an arranged marriage.
wow.
And the excuse always was that his life was ruined and her life was ruined because she didn't get back to Italy. Now, she was very cruel about my mother, but she had been very nice to my mother. And this is where her anger first came from. Because from what I was told by the family members, because she was so young, my grandmother tried to take her under her wing.
Mm,
But my grandmother didn't understand mental illness. And in 1961, postpartum depression is not how it treated the way it is now. It was a secret, it couldn't be real. And my grandmother's chant was always, but you had children. Her thing was, if you had children, then there was nothing that you couldn't do, and you did everything that you had to do. And she simply didn't understand mental illness. On top of being abused by an alcoholic mother, locked in closets for days at a time, sometimes 3 days, no bathroom, no food or water, while her mother was on a bender.
your mother's mother.
My mother also was a schizophrenic. I
Mm,
didn't find out about the schizophrenia until I was in my 50s.
wow.
Yes, so
Wow.
I never even knew that she had something that could be passed on. According to my father, the psychiatrist said there was nothing wrong with my mother. And according to my mother just wanted to have a good time and not be bothered with her children. This is the stance that everybody took. My father rarely, if ever, mentioned my mother. And I think once in my whole life, and my father lived till I was 29, I only heard him say one slightly negative thing about her. He really didn't talk about her much. And if he did, he didn't say bad things. He might say, remember something funny she did, or it was usually very harmless. My grandmother, it would have been a day without sunshine if she didn't talk about my mother in a derogatory way, because she had been so disappointed that all her efforts didn't work out.
I got it. Yeah.
So
So,
that's how it worked out for my grandmother. She was, an Italian immigrant. She was the educated one in the family. She finished grade school, knew how to read and write, and because she was the baby and the family had a little money from their farming, they sent her to be the seamstress. So she was actually the elite sister in the
oh, wow.
household. She had a trade.
Yeah. So, were there any helpers? Was there any light in this dark childhood?
My father kept his he went from a deli to a grocery store because the building was condemned. And here is where his mother had him in the shackles. Because when the building was condemned that my father's deli was in, the
Mm,
city did not pay you to move. So he lost a great business. He couldn't sell it. There was nothing he could do. He needed money to open up a new place.
mm,
My grandmother gave him her life savings, which in 1967, I'm going to say, was $38,000.
Wow.
$38,000 is still some good money today. $38,000 in 67 was a fortune.
Oh, absolutely.
She had scrimped and saved every penny. She was always a person that cried broke, but then when she wanted something, somehow money would disappear, which drove the rest of the family crazy. So not only did she take his children and take care of them, but now she had also funded his business and bought it as a partnership for my bachelor uncle. I didn't realize, because when you're close to things, we all knew that my uncle was a little slow, but a nice guy. It wasn't until my father was literally in the hospital on his deathbed telling me, you don't realize it, but your uncle is mildly retarded and always has been. I said, are you kidding me? He said, you just think he's a little slow because he's right there. But he said, he's mentally retarded. So my father had his mother, who he owed big time, and she used that power to rule the house. Every single thing had to be her way. Now, I have some compassion for her because she had an arranged marriage to a much, much older man. How did that happen? When the family brought someone in who had gone to America, it was an older man, 40 years old, 40 or 42 to her 19. He was meant for the oldest sister to get married first. Don't open the door if you're really young and pretty in these situations, because my grandmother was the baby of the family. She was 19 and she was gorgeous till the day she died at nearly 93. She opened the door. He saw her, said, I don't want that one. I want this one. And that's when the whole mess started.
Oh my
He
God.
ruled with the old immigrant Italian fist. She was always low on the totem pole. And when he died, she had freedom. She had money in the bank, and she was just going to break out. But then we came along, and guilt told her that she had to take us. I was supposed to go to my father's sister, and I went for 2 weeks, the big family secret, the one thing that grandma never told anybody about, and nobody ever told me. I found out from this aunt and uncle when I was 40 years old that I had gone to live with them, but my father made such a fuss that my grandmother was afraid to lose my brother, which is the one she wanted. That's just the way it was. She simply didn't like girls because she didn't like herself, because she wasn't liked. She was brought up in, an oppressed position, and it was just worked in her head that this is what you did. Actually, my father and my aunt and my uncles all said we were so lucky because grandma was so nice to us. I sort of shiver at how they were treated when they were kids, because all they could do was actually like be jealous of it. So, but she was a hellion, and she was forced to take me. And nobody, and these are one of the things that I've learned in life, is never do what you don't really want to do. Because she never did the job right, because she didn't want me. She was 52 when my brother was born, 52. She had extreme arthritis and she was allergic to aspirin, so she couldn't take pain relievers. And 52 with severe arthritis is not a time for a woman to take a 19-month-old toddler and a 3-day-old baby from the hospital. She wanted one.
Well, what I'm hearing is that in some way she was a light, despite the fact that she was very difficult to deal with. So that's really interesting. And I know you don't like what happened to you. Nobody wants a child to suffer the way you did, being disliked by your grandma, and having to live with her, being put down for being female. Terrible, terrible experience. And yet there were things that horrible uh, cauldron of fire made you into gold. And what was it that came out of that? What gold can you still access from having that difficult, unbelievable childhood?
Well, grandma was very happy that I did well in school. And the one thing that I can say, because when I began to sit down and really think about this, and COVID, I was home a lot, you know, you can't work, couldn't work during then. I was home a lot. I was then out of New York City. I grew up in the heart of Manhattan on the Upper West Side. I was now living in the mountains of Idaho.
Mm,
And it was lockdown. So I'm in the house a lot. I'm writing a lot. I was always a big diary keeper, morning pages, everything. That's been my lifeline for over 30 years. But I began to think about grandma. And I remembered something that I did after she died. I remember I made myself sit down every day for over a month. It went on for weeks and weeks. And I said, no matter what, you're not going to be bitter about her, because you're not going to be your relatives. You're not going to be everybody else in the world that grandma had contact with. I said, you are going to remember all the good things. And I forced myself every day. And I had to sit there, man. I was sitting there with paper and pen. And I would sit there and I didn't get up until I wrote something good about grandma. That was actually a really good exercise that I came up with her for, because I remembered she always said, you don't have the patience for sewing and knitting and stuff like that, but she said you have the talent. She said you have the talent for anything that you want to do. You just don't know what you want to do. I used to take that as an insult, and then I
mm,
began to realize as I got older what she meant. She thought I was talented. She thought I was creative. And the odd thing was, near the end of her days, when my bachelor uncle died a few months before her, as a result of a hospital disease, a tragic traffic accident. He died at 60. And then I had full care of her until she passed away. Total full care for a few months. She had been in a nursing home for rehab, and it got to the point where she was not going to be able to return home. So I was at the nursing home every day with her. And I remember a situation came up at the nursing home, and her daughter and her son-in-law said, we'll take care of it. She actually told them, she said, you can't do that. You're not going to be able to fix it. Only Franny could fix it. So I get this call, and it's like, okay, so grandma has said this situation has come up with the nursing home, and you're the only person who can handle this. And they said, we don't know how we're going to swing this, but evidently this is some magical power of yours.
mm.
So first of all, I nearly fell over when I listened to him. I said, okay, I got this. I actually made it happen.
Yeah, I believe
And I
it.
realized something. Grandma gave me at the end of her life power of attorney, the keys to her apartment, and
Mm,
absolutely did everything my way. She put me in charge of her life at the end of hers, which was
oh,
stunning to the
yeah.
family and to myself, because somehow that gave me this kind of magical power boost
Hmm.
at age 40, 41, and got me through a lot, especially because not long after, my husband got very, very sick, and then began a whole
Mm,
other series of things. But after that, my writing got better and everything got better. So I would have to say that I'm grateful for her. She taught me everything that I shouldn't do. And she also made me aware of some little magical powers of mine. So
yeah,
I've developed compassion because of her.
yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And it sounds like grandma acknowledged your brain power. She didn't shut that down. She actually used it. And she also saw your courage and your stamina and your big heart and ability to handle almost anything. And that may have come out of all of your experiences. You just didn't know it. She was acknowledging, oh, Franny can't handle anything. Bring her in. You were at the top of the line and you had no idea. But now you know. And that's that's what you were developing anyway. You
Some
know,
people never get to know that.
that's right. That's
You
right.
make my head swell, it's not going to fit in the screen anymore.
No way. No way. So, what could others learn from your childhood experience?
Well, it does, that old saying about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I learned what not to do with her. Some people pass on the craziness, they pass
Mhm.
on, they are my father, perfect example, very resentful, like that grandma wanted to spend the money to send us to Catholic school. Grandma, and you couldn't say anything. He'd say, I didn't get to go to Catholic school. They wouldn't spend a quarter a month on me. They wouldn't buy me a tie for assembly. You kids get everything.
He was
You don't know
jealous.
what bad is.
Oh,
Jealousy. And
jealous.
you hit the nail on the head.
Oh my
It
God.
never occurred to me that parents could be jealous of
Yeah.
kids. I didn't know what the resentment was. I realize now, late in life, it was jealousy,
Yes. My
absolute
goodness.
jealousy. And but he always knew that she didn't treat me well. I
Mm,
mean, one of the most stunning conversations that I ever had with my father was about going to visit my grandmother. I had finished up the store, work at the store. Things were closing. I had some things that I wanted to bring her. And he just stood there. He said, I want to ask you something. I said, yeah. He said, what do you go visit grandma for? Why would you want to visit grandma? And I'm just looking at him like, this is your mother. She never leaves the house. She's lonely all the time. Everybody's out of the house all day working. When everybody comes home, you all flip on the TV. Nobody drinks a cup of tea with her and has a conversation. They eat, watch TV, and go to their rooms. I wanted to say all that, and I'm looking at him. I'm like, what? He said, why ever would you ever want to go back to that house? And it was just like, and I'm thinking to myself now, every time that comes up, and I can, when you can see something on the screen, I was thinking, dude, you knew that I was living in a miserable situation and you let me live in it to make your life easier so you wouldn't have to worry about us, so that you could keep your store open 363 or 4 days a year. 364. He only closed on Christmas. He was always working. So, and he never stopped working. But of course, where did the money go? It didn't go back to grandma and it didn't go back into the family. Things that I found out and things that I saw, but it didn't register until the very end when everything got bad, that my father was a compulsive gambler. And that's where the money was going. When he died, my grandmother was made life even more miserable for me for a couple of 3 years because my father had lost all her money and the store was defunct and Peter didn't have a job anymore. It took him like years, a couple of years to like find a simple job in a grocery store. It was
your
awful. It was quite a come down.
your
You
uncle.
know,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it was really hard. And because everybody saw, but nobody would admit. The same way my father didn't see my brother's alcoholism. The same way that when my brother literally went crazy, he was a huge man and was throwing garbage cans at the cars passing on Amsterdam Avenue. And we had to get the delivery boys to drag him into the store and lock him up in the basement. And I said, Daddy, we have to do something about Joey now. You have to do something. He said, I can't do it. He said, you don't know what it is to do that to someone. And he meant having someone put into a mental hospital, which had happened to my mother. She
Yeah.
spent time in, I would guess, sanitariums, psychiatric hospitals and things like that. He had to put her in, and it was like the worst thing he ever had to do. And he wouldn't do it with my brother. I should have intervened, but all the shoulda, woulda, coulda. I could have, I should have, I would have, but then again, the family wouldn't have gone along with it because it would have been embarrassing.
Mhm.
It would have
Yes.
upset Joey.
What will people
It would have
think?
done this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he was already upset if he was drinking that way, you know.
Yeah.
You were already locking him up in basements when he was, crazy drunk,
Mm,
and you didn't want to do something for him because you were going to feel bad. The first thing that he
mm.
said, and as we're talking, I realize now, you don't know what it is to do that to someone. He was talking about how bad he felt when he did that to my mother.
Yeah.
Your feelings are not supposed to count in this.
Right.
You're supposed to just buck up and get with the program, but it is what it is.
Well, here's the thing. It's about a message that you have for the world as a result of surviving, and that your story illustrates how tough you can be, not tough in a tough in a good sense, not tough in a mean sense. That you didn't become mean, you didn't become like any of the people around you. You are a soft, warm, heart-loving person, and despite all you went through, and that's a lesson for the world. That just because you had a terrible childhood, that didn't mean that you became terrible. So, there's hope for all of us. So,
My father didn't pay me a lot of compliments, so I guess what I'll say is this. One day he paid me a compliment.
all
He
right.
said, no matter what happens to you, you're my happy-go-lucky child. He
Mm,
said, because my brother was the deep, dark, smoldering bit of coal. Always a great personality and always a nice kid, but there was something inside of him. Everything was eternalized. He said, you're my happy-go-lucky kid. He said, no matter what happens, the next day you're back out there. And that's all I can tell people. It's just you got to get back out there. Oh, I definitely suffered for years. It was very hard for me to give up control in work situations and things like that. It was a bit of like my grandmother. I was very centered on being organized and having things go my way. But I also worked in sales. So if I didn't keep a close guard on it, everything could just get away from me. And then, there were people who manufactured the stuff and people waiting. So I did have a lot of control issues. Now I don't have to be in charge of everything, and it's such a relief.
such a relief, isn't it?
And I'm still finding my childhood. As
Mm,
we've discussed before, I told you when I was in high school, the administration told my father there was something about me. He said, "What has she done?" They couldn't put their finger about on it. I was a good student. I didn't fight with anybody. I did everything right, but they couldn't quite tell what was off. So he took me to a therapist, and the therapist, after one session, told my father when I was 15 years old that she exhibits absolutely no signs of ever having a childhood. And I can still see my father with his devastated eyes and how he
mm,
sat there so quietly for such a long time after he told me that.
my, yeah.
Well, my grandmother couldn't give us a childhood. She was not one for going out. She was very, very frightened of public transportation, of having to go to new places. She didn't want to speak English, even though she could very well on state occasions, really knock it out of the park with English. I mean, don't get in her way. Suddenly she spoke the best English in town. Or if there was a mistake at the bank or the supermarket tally, boom, English was there. But so we were always home, and it was television and snacks that we liked and everything just to keep us happy. So,
We'll keep you
television and
quiet.
snacks, no sports, no music, no
Mm,
nothing. So, I'm continually looking for my childhood. I play more now than I ever did as a child. I'm
yeah.
62 and still wondering what I'm going to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
I'll let you know when I find out.
Well, I know that you're a wonderful,
Thank you.
creative, intelligent, loving, compassionate woman. And I just think that is outstanding for what you had to climb through just to stand up. it's sensational. So
Well,
thank you for,
I've read your book, kid,
uh,
more
that's
than
for another
once,
day.
and I lived in the shadow. I had
Mm,
physical contact with my mother for visits until I was about 5 or 6. And then after a very bad incident where I was injured, I didn't go anymore to see her. I would only see her if people were in the room. And possibly that I can actually remember just about every visit.
wow.
And I remember her sitting there. She was just quiet. And I remember her eyes would look at me almost as if she were looking at someone that she was trying to remember.
Mm,
So I have a clear vision of her. She was soft spoken. And, you know, I remember being in a store and there was a man with a brogue. And I said, "Oh, my mother was Irish and her name was Geraldine." And we were talking and everything else. And he said, um, something about his mother. And I said, "Well, my mother, she was just a tragic Irish figure." And he said, "Ah, yes, dear, I know." It's just, she was just this tragic Irish rose. And that's how I think of her now. And I hope wherever she is, she died when she was age 57. I found this out. She died the day after one of my happiest birthdays, my 40th. She died December 13th.
wow.
And I didn't find out until I was past 50 that
Mm,
she was gone. I didn't even know her birthday. St. Patrick's is special to me because no, my father couldn't remember her birthday, and neither could anybody else. I had one picture of my mother. I had her Virgin Mary statue. She was brought up Catholic, of course, and that's all I had.
wow.
And a little dolly that she made when she was in the hospital,
Oh,
which I still have the little dolly. And the statue, unfortunately, uh, was lost in a move. So that statue is gone. And I still have the one and only picture, which is a picture of her holding my brother. That's all I have for my mother. And nobody could remember the birthday. My father didn't have her birth certificate. She didn't have those papers. She must have shown it when she got married, but it was lost. So I found out she was born November 20th. But I always celebrated her birthday quietly by myself on St. Patrick's Day. I still do because I can't quite connect with the November birthday.
yeah. Interesting. Wow. Thank you so much, Francis, for sharing with us. This has
Um,
been,
Mary Fran, I'll share with you anytime.
oh, thank you.
And
Wow.
thank you for your book, Breaking Through Concrete, because when I read that, having lived in the shadow, you
Yeah.
lived right in the middle of the hot pot of madness.
Yeah.
My mother was out of my life physically
Mm,
before I was 6 or 7. You had your mother a long time. I lived in the shadow of hearing about it every day,
mm.
but you lived right in the middle. So I can't tell you what Breaking Through Concrete did for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'm looking forward to any upcoming books.
All right. Well, Francis, thank you once again. And we'll talk again, I'm sure. Much
I
love.
hope so.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.